then it demands attention. But this criticism of the position taken by the Jamaican Prime Minister, as reflected in his statement at that CARICOM meeting in St. Kitts and Nevis. Column inches are being devoted to criticizing the decision. In fact, I read one column where a contrast was being drawn between Mr. Holness and the former Prime Minister P.J. Patterson. And it was said that what Mr. Patterson has said about the situation in Cuba is stronger, far more positive, and reflective of what is needed at this time when you compare it to what Holness said in his statement at CARICOM. And the writer leans heavily on that joint statement issued by a clutch of former prime ministers in the country, in the region. Frondell Stewart from Barbados, leaders from Antigua and Barbuda, Guyana, Tillman Thomas among them, presidents as well, so Donald Ramotar from Guyana on it as well, Bruce Golding of course. And it was given to us as P.J. Patterson lighting the way through the darkness that exists in this region, where a strong position condemning the U.S. for their action on Cuba is concerned, and that is the standard. The Patterson perspective is the standard by which we should judge what is said and done. And because that is the standard, what Holness then said at CARICOM, weak, mealy-mouthed, yeah? Whereas Patterson was a vertebrate, Holness was the invertebrate. No backbone, jellyback like the lady in the viral clip said. And we were told that that can't happen, you know, three-piece suit and much song and dance. And I said to myself, well, clearly I missed something. Because if I'm to go with the writer and how strong he says Patterson's statement was, and how appropriate it was, and how that was now the standard by which you should judge people like Holness talking about the Cuban situation and eyeballing the United States and telling them that what they're doing is wrong and taking action to help the people of Cuba. I thought I had missed another statement from the group of leaders, including Mr. Patterson, because I reasoned to myself and said, the basis of this article in the Sunday Gleaner and the statements attributed to P.J. Patterson could not be in the statement I read from Mr. Patterson. And so I searched for this new article. Didn't find it because it doesn't exist. And then I said, oh, so it's the original statement that is being used to lionize the position of Mr. Patterson while minimizing, rubbishing the statement from Holness. And I found it ridiculous, the comparison. So ridiculous that I said to myself, even though it's in the news, you better avoid that this morning. Do not give that any more oxygen, because you're doing the writer a favor. But I can't escape it. I have to talk about it. Because people who did not read the statement from the group of prime ministers and former heads of state, and who are led only by the article, will think that in lighting the way, Mr. Patterson said some things that should really cause the United States to look at itself seriously and question whether or not it's taking the right stance in its attitude towards Cuba. And that is why I'm talking about it this morning, to help with the information accuracy that people will have, to help to balance the perspective. And just before I go to the break and come back, Mr. Patterson said nothing wrong, so I don't want people to see this as an attack on Mr. Patterson. It's not, because what he said in the statement, the statement he attached his name to, and oh, that's another thing. The way the thing is written, even though it says that the position came from a group of former prime ministers and heads of state, the writer then, after saying that, makes it seem as if it was P.J. Patterson who wrote the statement himself. Of course not so. But even so, Mr. Patterson said nothing wrong and said what is expected of a former head of government. Balanced and calling for the right things. No issue. The issue is with how those words were used to make it seem as if the current prime minister is a Mickey Mouse leader and that a former prime minister is showing how to, with gravitas, speak to power in this ever-changing world order where power is being wielded like we've never seen power wielded before. All right, I'm going to start, man. I'm going to get into it after the break. Stay with me. That the former prime ministers and presidents in CARICOM said regarding Cuba. They say, "We who have previously served as heads of state and government of the Caribbean community are perturbed at the deepening humanitarian crisis in Cuba and are impelled to make public this appeal to avert further human destruction. The executive order by the U.S. against any nation providing oil to Cuba without the imposition of punitive discriminating tariffs constitutes economic warfare and inflicts unconscionable suffering upon the Cuban people. The universal principle of dialogue to resolve conflicts and disputes cannot be abandoned on the altar of the mighty, powerful waging political vendettas against smaller nations by economic warfare. The consequences of this horrific fuel blockade are catastrophic and constitute criminal punishment of the 11 million civilians by the strangulation of Cuba's vital requirements for energy, food, medication, education, and basic livelihood." On December 8, 1972, the Prime Ministers of Barbados, Guyana, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago made the bold decision to establish diplomatic relations with Cuba in assertion of our sovereign right to end the hemispheric economic isolation of a neighboring Caribbean state. For over 5 decades, Cuba has stood in solidarity with the Caribbean through medical brigades, educational scholarships, sport, and disaster relief, freely giving assistance in times of our greatest need and devoid of any request by them for reciprocal support of any kind. We, during our tenure over the last 33 years, have been inspired and imbued by the courage and foresight of our predecessors at the helm to consistently sponsor and support the resolutions at the UN General Assembly for the termination of the illegal financial and economic embargo by the US against Cuba. That abhorrent embargo was condemned by an overwhelming majority of member states, including 4 permanent members of the Security Council. The global community cannot remain mute and indolent while a fatal, pernicious fuel tourniquet stifles the Cuban economy and suffocates human lives there. We advocate the imperative of repealing immediately any decree that will result in an unprecedented humanitarian crisis in Cuba and undermine the tenets of international law. The foundation of the Caribbean community rests on the right of each sovereign state to promote regional solidarity and advance comprehensive cooperation between all Caribbean states. The CARICOM tradition of solidarity and the exercise of the right to enter and pursue beneficial programs within our regional geographic space have proven invaluable and worthy of perpetuation. We believe the Caribbean citizenry will support any decision by our leaders to render tangible material support to our brothers and sisters in Cuba at this time of need. We dare not depart from this path and must now fulfill our sacred duty to appeal for the exercise of our shared humanity in responding to the terror of economic warfare against the Cuban people. We will never accept the doctrine that might makes right. Economic warfare, waged on differences of ideology and political systems, is no less odious in our single universe than military invasion anywhere for territorial aggrandizement. In endorsing the findings of UN human rights experts that this coercive executive order is a violation of international law, we urge the government of the United States to rescind this inhumane weapon of mass destruction. We call upon the international community to provide Cuba with desperately needed humanitarian assistance. We stand with the people of Cuba. We stand as a zone of peace. We stand for a shared Caribbean future. Now, the sentiments expressed in that, and even the strict words used, How are they different from what a parliament year after year votes to pass by resolution in terms of their call for the ending of the embargo on Cuba? Word for word, in context, and the sentiment of the words used in that letter. How different are they from what Holness has said in the past about the situation in Cuba, or how any of the other Caribbean leaders who've spoken publicly on the Cuban situation, what they've said in terms of sentiment, context, and even the strict words used? So why are we so keen to invent a situation, try to capitalize on those who can't read, or don't read and understand, by trying to make it seem as if Mr. Patterson advocated for a direct confrontation with the US diplomatically to end this warfare on Cuba, because warfare it is, and to then say that that position shows how weak Holness is? Then it must be a reasonable person would conclude that people are looking for every reason to say Holness is weak. Not true. Because if you can use this letter as the basis to say, look at how a former leader speaks, this is how a former leader should act, this is how a leader should act, these are the words that should be used, what are you talking about? It doesn't rise to the level of confrontation. It doesn't rise to the level of confrontation. It doesn't rise to the level of saying, boy, this is the example to follow. It doesn't rise to the level of saying anything else that is said that is not this is weak and mealy-mouthed. And we know how people are, because in the same article, the writer speaks about the situation in Palestine. Listen, when I die, and I hope it's not for now, you listeners and viewers must remember one thing about me. Remember that I was the one who laid out in stark terms for you the constant battle between self-interest, and how that constant battle is the basis for the problems that we have in the world, at the international level, at the geopolitical level, in our homes, in our interpersonal relationships, at work, in our office relationships, self-interest colliding. And so a man will have a particular interest in a particular matter, doesn't get what he deems to be justice, and he feels as if his self-interest is being subsumed, is being stifled, is being thwarted, the expression of that self-interest. And then he finds various ways to attack the person he believes is the obstacle to his free expression of self-interest. And I believe that this is the case where this writer and this article is concerned. That's my conclusion. That's my opinion. Because the juxtaposition and the comparison and the contrast, it is not sensible. It lacks intelligence. And it is written in a manner to only fool those who don't have the access to information. Because those of us who know, you realize I avoided to tell you that, boy, Holness has to speak this way, because I don't need to tell nationwide listeners that. They know that already. I don't have to say, well, people who are out of the fray can always recommend how you should conduct yourself in the fray, when the man in the fray is seeing things a different way because he's in the fray. I don't need to tell nationwide listeners that, because you know. But for those who are new, and those who are trying to catch the pace that we've always set on this station, the previous was for you. It was to help to bring you along. It was to help to give you some insight into what is being said, and how what is being said is not sensible. It lacks credibility. And it's a spillover from people who, whatever their self-interest is and however noble it is, not questioning that, they believe that their free expression of that has been thwarted by something said or done, or not said or not done, by Holness. Hence, let me take the chance to belittle him. Let me take the chance to flay him over the back with the tamarind switch. Let me boy him up. Yeah? These are not ordinary times. I've never seen a time like this in my relatively short life. I have never seen power being wielded in the way that power is being wielded by the United States. You look around Europe, I've never seen the cult of personality take hold and dictate how countries act, because the leader in charge has a particular vision, and the traditional consultation, the traditional cooperation, those are eschewed for unitary action. I've never seen that before. And we behave as if we are blind to those realities. Are people not jarred still, scarred even, by what happened in Venezuela? A man there, you can say he's duly elected or not. I certainly think he stole the election. But he was there in the chair. And you wake up Saturday morning and him gone. Iran's Ayatollah, who has spent years terrorizing, killing people. A couple bombs later, we're speaking about him in the past. Was there the consultation? Was there the cooperation? Was there the trying to use diplomacy to get your partners on board to say, well, how best do we execute these things? With execute the operative word? No. So it's a different time, and you can't do politics the same way. And John Tom, sitting on a stool in a bar, or sitting on his ottoman in his lavish home, whether in uptown or somewhere in rural Jamaica where you have lavish homes, and who rages at the TV at a news item, and the young girl in your house, I don't mean underage, but young, who you're trying to impress about your intelligence and your grasp of political issues, is impressed when you rage at the decision that the decision makers make. And the man them at the bar give you a forward where you burn out the prime minister, burn out the leader, burn out this person. And you say, boy, what they should do is this, that. They get a pat on the back. And the young lady at home gives you favors because you know you're talking strong. How can you compare yourself to a prime minister who has a nation and a nation's interests to cater for? So you, in your space, where your self-interest is the most important thing to you, and all right, so the group of people whose self-interest you represent, says 20 of them, your 20 self-interests, you want a decision made that facilitates the expression of 21 self-interests, and you say that that is more important than a person who has the self-interest of 2.8 million people to cater to. How that makes sense? I tell you. No rest a brick. So I obey. Back with more after these.